May 3, 2022. A flight pen in the Northern California Redwoods. Inside, a 6-year-old male condor named Poi Sun walks slowly toward the open door. He is the first of his kind to take flight over this forest in 130 years. The bird lifts off the ground, climbs above the canopy of old-growth redwoods, and disappears into the sky over Yurok ancestral land. For the people watching, it is a moment no living human in this region has ever witnessed. For the species, it is a calculated bet, decades in the making, that the largest land bird in North America can still survive in a world that almost killed it off entirely. To understand why this single bird matters, you have to understand the number that defined this species' extinction. 22. By 1982, that was the entire global population of California condors. Not in one valley, not in one region, on the entire planet. Today, there are over 600. And the story of how that happened involves a phone booth, a hand puppet, a biologist who chased the last wild condor across the deserts of Southern California, and a Native American tribe that spent 20 years waiting for the moment in that redwood forest. This is the story of how a species came back from the edge and why the war to keep them alive is far from over. The California condor is not a normal bird. Its wingspan reaches 9.5 feet, wider than most doorways. Adults weigh up to 25 pounds. In flight, riding thermal currents along coastal cliffs, a condor can travel 100 miles in a single day without flapping its wings. They live up to 60 years, longer than most dogs, longer than many humans in the regions they once dominated. But the strangest thing about condors is what they eat. They are pure scavengers. They do not hunt. They do not kill. They circle the sky waiting for something else to die, then descend to clean the carcass. This is not a flaw. It is an ecological function. Scavengers prevent the spread of disease. They recycle nutrients. They are the cleanup crew that keeps a forest, a desert, or a mountain range from drowning in its own decay. 10,000 years ago, condors were doing this job across most of North America. They scavenged mammoths. They cleaned the bones of giant ground sloths and saber-toothed cats and ancient camels. Their range stretched from British Columbia to Florida. Then the megafauna died. The Pleistocene extinction wiped out the giant mammals that condors depended on. And as their food sources disappeared, the condor's range collapsed. By the time European settlers arrived on the Pacific coast, condors had retreated to a single corridor along California, Oregon, and Baja, Mexico. The largest land bird in North America was already a relict species, surviving on whatever it could find. Whales washed up on beaches, deer carcasses in canyons, the last ecological echoes of an Ice Age world. That was the situation when the killing began. Settlers shot condors for sport. Ranchers poisoned them, believing they killed livestock, which they never did. Egg collectors raided their nests. Lead bullets, used in hunting throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, left fragments in deer and elk carcasses that condors then scavenged. Lead poisoning, even in microscopic amounts, attacks the nervous system and kidneys. A condor that ingests a single lead fragment can die within weeks. By 1967, the condor was the first species ever placed on the federal endangered species list in the United States. The population at that point was around 60 birds. It kept falling. 1979. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service launched the California Condor Recovery Program. Field biologists fanned out across the species' last strongholds in the Los Padres National Forest, the canyons of the Césped Sanctuary, the rugged backcountry where the last condors still flew. They counted 30 birds, then 27, then 22. The species was collapsing in real time, and the question facing biologists in 1982 was not whether the wild population would survive. It was whether anything could be saved at all. Pete Bloom is a raptor biologist. He had spent his career trapping eagles, hawks, and falcons for research. In 1982, he was asked to do something nobody in modern conservation had ever attempted at this scale: capture every remaining wild California condor. The plan was controversial from the start. Environmental groups protested. Some chained themselves to the gates of the Los Angeles Zoo. The argument was philosophical. A condor in a cage is not a condor. Take them all out of the sky, and you have already lost the species, even if you save the genetics. The counter-argument was harder. Leave them in the wild, and within a decade, there would be no wild condors left at all. The recovery program made the call: capture every bird. The trapping took 5 years. The final operation came down to a single condor, a C9, adult Condor 9, a 7-year-old male, one of the last breeding males left on Earth. By April 1987, AC9 was the only wild California condor still flying. Biologist Jan Hamber, an ornithologist who had spent her entire career documenting the species, tracked him across the desert north of Los Angeles. On April 19th, AC9 landed near a stillborn calf that Hamber's team had placed as bait at Bitter Creek National Wildlife Refuge. Hamber drove to a Union 76 gas station and used a payphone to call in the trap team. She was alone. She could have stopped. Nobody would have known. Instead, she made the call. That night, biologists drove through the dark to set the trap. The next morning, when AC9 returned to feed, a camouflaged cannon fired a net over his head. The last wild California condor was caged. Jan Hamber later said it felt like the sky was empty. For the next 15 years, no California condor flew free on Earth. What happened in those years is one of the strangest stories in modern conservation. At the Los Angeles Zoo and the San Diego Wild Animal Park, biologists began breeding condors using techniques nobody had ever tried before. They removed eggs from incubating pairs, which triggered the parents to lay a replacement, doubling reproduction rates. The pulled eggs were incubated artificially, and the chicks were raised by humans. But they could not be raised by hands. A chick that imprints on humans will not survive in the wild. So, biologists built hand puppets shaped like the head and neck of an adult condor. Every meal, every grooming session, every interaction with the chick happened through the puppet. For the first time in the history of the species, a generation of California condors grew up being fed by sock puppets in a sterile breeding facility. It worked. The first chick, named Moloko, hatched in 1988. By 1992, the captive population had grown enough that the program began the second phase. Release. The first releases failed. Birds collided with power lines. Some imprinted on humans despite the puppets. Others died of lead poisoning within months of release. In 1994, the entire population was pulled back into captivity for program reassessment. Releases resumed in 1995 with a smarter approach. Mock power poles wired to deliver mild electric shocks taught the birds to avoid real ones. Pre-release pens exposed the condors to natural foraging conditions. Older condors were paired with younger ones to act as mentors. By 1996, condors were flying over the Vermilion Cliffs in Arizona for the first time since 1924. By 2004, the first chick had hatched in the wild. In 2002, AC9 himself was released back into the wild after 15 years in captivity. Jan Hamber stood at the release site as he climbed into the sky over the Los Padres Mountains. She said only one thing: free at last. If you're following the story of how this species came back, hit subscribe. American Wild Wings investigates the hidden stories of birds across North America every week. While the captive breeding program was rebuilding the population, something else was happening. 400 miles north of Los Angeles. In 2003, a panel of Yurok tribal elders made a decision. The California condor, known in the Yurok language as prego niche, the bird that carries prayers to the Creator, would be the highest priority species for return to their ancestral land. The condor had not been seen over the Northern California Redwoods since 1892. The Yurok Tribe is California's largest Native American tribe. Their territory stretches along the lower Klamath River through some of the oldest old-growth redwood forest left on Earth. For thousands of years, condor feathers had been integral to Yurok ceremony. The birds' songs were part of the world renewal rituals that the tribe believed kept the entire ecosystem in balance. The condor had been missing for 110 years. What followed was a campaign that almost nobody outside the Pacific Northwest paid attention to. Yurok wildlife biologists spent 19 years studying the redwood ecosystem. They mapped potential release sites. They assessed contamination risks. They built relationships with the National Park Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Peregrine Fund, and Pacific Gas and Electric Company. They constructed a release and management facility near the Klamath River, with a simulated power pole inside the flight pen and high-definition cameras streaming live feeds to monitoring stations. Thomas Gates, who worked on the project from the Yurok Office of Self-Governance, later said that when they started, people thought they were crazy. Then May 3, 2022 arrived. That morning, biologists opened the door of the release pen. Poi Wee Sun, the male whose name means the one who goes ahead, stepped into the wild. A few hours later, the female Najem Nachween Ka, she carries our prayers, followed him. 2 condors over the redwoods. After 130 years of silence, the species was back. The Yurok release was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Because while the condors were finally returning to Northern California, the river system that defined the region was about to change in ways that no scavenger could ignore. Meanwhile, on the Klamath River, the largest dam removal project in United States history was reaching its final phase. 4 hydroelectric dams had been blocking the Klamath since the early 20th century. They were owned by Pacificorp, generated less than 2% of the company's power, and devastated the salmon runs that the Yurok, the Karuk, and the Hoopa Valley tribes depended on. For 2 decades, those tribes had fought to bring the dams down. In October 2024, they did. The final dam was demolished. The Klamath River began flowing freely from its headwaters in Oregon to the Pacific Ocean for the first time in over a century. Within 10 days, more than 6,000 Chinook salmon were observed migrating upstream into newly accessible habitat. Within a year, water temperatures had stabilized. Bald eagles, ospreys, otters, bears, and beavers were spotted along stretches of river that had been ecological dead zones for generations. For salmon, this was a resurrection. For condors, it was something nobody had calculated into the original recovery plans. Salmon die after spawning. Their carcasses get pulled out of the rivers by bears, eagles, and scavenging mammals, distributing marine nutrients across the forest floor. Those carcasses are also food for the largest scavenger in North America. And unlike deer or elk shot with lead bullets, salmon are lead-free. A river restored, a scavenger returned. The ecological logic was suddenly aligning in a way that the Yurok elders had predicted 20 years earlier when they said the condor's return was inseparable from the restoration of the whole landscape. But the war was not over. January 2025. A young condor named Payphone, meaning kind and good-natured, was found dead in the backcountry of Redwood National Park. He had been flying free for only a few months. The necropsy returned the result the team had been dreading: lead poisoning. Payphone was 18 months old. He had been the friendliest bird in the flock, the one who preened and huddled with the other condors, the one who shared food without aggression. He had ingested lead fragments from a carcass somewhere in the wild lands of Northern California, and his kidneys had failed. This is the part of the story that conservation channels do not usually tell. California passed a complete ban on lead ammunition in 2019. It is illegal to hunt with lead bullets anywhere in the state, and yet condors continue to die from lead exposure at almost the same rate they did before the ban. Why? Researchers at the University of California, Santa Cruz studied this question and reached an uncomfortable conclusion. The bans work. Public outreach works. But condors are becoming better at finding their own food. They range farther from the supplemental feeding sites where conservation workers leave lead-free carcasses. They scavenge in remote areas where some hunters still use lead ammunition, either illegally or in neighboring states where lead is still legal. The very behavior that signals a species recovering, expanding its range, becoming less dependent on human assistance, is the same behavior that exposes condors to the lead that almost killed them off in the first place. Just under half of all wild condor deaths since 1992 have been caused by lead poisoning. In the Central California flock, it accounts for 62% of recorded deaths. The species is recovering, and the species is still being poisoned. Despite the lead crisis, despite the bird flu outbreak that killed 21 condors in Arizona in 2023, the population kept growing. By October 2025, the Northern California Condor Restoration Program reached a milestone that nobody in the project had planned. The 22nd free-flying condor was released into the Redwoods. Her name was Ruer Owu Mo, which translates to "Together We Sing." She was born in May 2024 at the Peregrine Fund's World Center for Birds of Prey in Idaho, raised in a flight pen with mentor condors, transferred to the Yurok facility, and walked out the release door into the same forest where her ancestors had vanished 133 years earlier. 22 free-flying condors over Yurok land, exactly the number that had once defined the species near extinction. Tiana Williams-Clausen, the director of the Yurok Wildlife Department, called it a monumental reversal. The same number that had marked the lowest point in the species' history was now flying over the Redwoods. 5 months later, in March 2026, biologists with the restoration program announced something nobody expected this early. A pair of the released condors, the female Najem Nachween Ka and the male Hlo Hulet, both nearly 7 years old, appeared to have laid an egg inside the hollow of an old-growth redwood. The first nesting attempt in the Pacific Northwest in over a century, the team could not visually confirm the egg. The nest site was too remote, hidden inside a cavity in one of the oldest trees on Earth. They tracked the pair through wing-mounted satellite transmitters, monitoring incubation behavior, watching for the 55 to 58-day window when a condor egg either hatches or fails. Chris West, the program manager, said the outcome was up to the birds. Human intervention would be minimal. Whether the egg hatched, whether a chick fledged, whether the pair tried again next year, all of it depended on the condors themselves. The current global population is 607, nearly 400 flying free across California, Arizona, Utah, Oregon, and Mexico. The species has clawed its way back from 22 to over 600 in 43 years, the most dramatic recovery of any endangered bird in North American history. But the bottleneck remains. Every California condor alive today descends from those same 22 ancestors. The genetic diversity of the species is permanently compressed. Lead poisoning is still the leading cause of death. Bird flu is still a threat. Climate change is altering the food chains that scavengers depend on. The recovery is real, but it is fragile, and it requires human management to continue. The Yurok Tribe plans to keep releasing condors into the Redwoods every year for at least 2 more decades. The goal is a self-sustaining Pacific Northwest population of 150 birds, breeding independently, dispersing across Northern California and Southern Oregon, filling an ecological niche that has been vacant since before the invention of the light bulb. It will not happen quickly. Condors are slow to breed. A pair produces 1 egg every 2 years. A chick takes more than a year of parental care before it can fend for itself. Generations of patient work, generations of careful management. But it is happening. The same forest that Poi Wee Sun flew over in 2022 now holds a possible nest. The same number that nearly defined extinction now defines the Northern California flock. And the same river that ran dead for a century now flows freely, carrying salmon upstream into a watershed that scavengers can finally feed from again. The bird that carries prayers is back over the Redwoods. The work to keep him there has only just begun. If you want to see how American conservation rebuilt another iconic species from the edge, the bald eagle story is on screen now. New investigations every week on American Wild Wings.